Well, we haven't podcasted in a long time.
No.
How are you?
Good. Don't say... Come on.
What?
We speak every single day.
Oh yeah, Dad, it's not like we haven't spoken. I mean, a lot has happened since we last podcasted. A lot has happened this fucking year.
Have we not podcasted since Corona at all?
I think we did one episode since we were both working from home, but I mean, obviously, to give context to it, coronavirus hit the world. We were all in quarantine and like working from home, and I think both of us just mentally needed a break.
Yeah.
So we didn't podcast for a few weeks, and then you made the decision that you don't want to co-host a podcast anymore, which is fine, and I respect that. And then, I mean, now we're in like the middle of the next civil rights movement, so a lot has happened.
I love the fact that my decision to leave is like a beacon.
Well, I mean, it is in terms of the
events.
podcast.
Yeah, but I'm so excited for you to do guests.
I know. I mean, so Kitty has returned for a special one-off episode. We started the podcast because we both love dogs and we're best friends and used to FaceTime and talk about dogs for hours anyway. And I'm still working out what I'm going to do with the podcast. I obviously love the podcast and I love the dog world and I want to keep doing it. I just don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you to have guests. I think it'll be really fun. And I'll come back as a guest whenever you need me to, but I think it'll be fun having different... Yeah, and I think it'll be fun having different people. It's just like a new era, you know?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're irreplaceable. I just love that like we have this unique relationship, and I think the way that we talk about dogs is very authentic because that's literally what we would do on FaceTime. So I just feel like there's no one else that I could talk about dogs with the way I do with you.
Oh, I disagree.
I don't know. It's weird though when you have a guest because you don't know them. So it's a very different...
Yeah, but do it... You can do... Yeah, but do it with your other friends.
Kids, I don't have any other friends.
You do. I can think of like 3 people plus.
I don't know. We'll see.
Get my sister. My sister wants to be on, so...
Does she really? Oh my god.
Yeah, she's really desperate too.
Well, I'll think about it. I mean, I've got time to think about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what we want to do for this episode is I think it is necessary to talk about what is going on in the world. So I think especially in the dog world, it's important to talk about it. So I think the things that I want to bring up and discuss today are going to be just related to the dog world. Obviously, because this is a dog podcast, and so there is just so much to discuss in so many different areas. So we're just going to focus on our little niche dog world. So like in the recent weeks, obviously a lot has come to light with brands and their representation of Black Indigenous people of colour. And I guess another thing to mention is I know in the UK you don't use Black Indigenous people of colour. You use BAME, right? Black Asian Minority Ethnic.
Oh, is that what it stands for? I couldn't remember. Yeah, we don't use Indigenous.
I guess for this conversation, we'll be using Black Indigenous people of colour because I think most of what I'm going to talk about focuses around America.
Okay, cool.
But
that makes sense. I'm so impressed with... You're so knowledgeable.
Oh my God, I haven't said anything. I just feel like, I think everyone feels like this as well, though. It's just that we know nothing. And I feel like it's like realising how ignorant you are to everything.
Completely agree.
And then wanting to improve. Mm-hmm. I mean, I also think just having discussions is part of it. Like us discussing stuff and like obviously doing this podcast episode.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So obviously everything going on with the Black Lives Matter movement does not exclude the dog world. I mean, even I took a look at how we have done as a podcast and what we've discussed in episodes and have we been representative enough. And there are so many episodes that we could have done and so many things, you know, that we could have talked about. And a lot of the time, you know, we just talked about Dalmatians instead, which is fine because it is a fun podcast. But I also think we had a platform to also be actively anti-racist. And I don't think that we've done enough. And I think it is like, it has been a wake up call for a lot of brands and a lot of people. And I mean, I was taking a look at the podcast episodes that we've done, and we did touch on a few, I guess, diverse episodes. Like we did Dogs of Ancient Egypt, but when we talked about celebrity dogs, we didn't choose a single Black celebrity.
Didn't we?
And then also the brands that we've discussed. I mean, it's just something, I guess, that we didn't think about. Like, you just see a brand and you like that brand. And we didn't check to see that they are inclusive. Mm-hmm. I mean, a brand that we've talked about again and again is Grounds and Hounds. And obviously we love the branding. We love the rescue support. We love the pit advocacy. But do you want to look at their Instagram right now?
Yeah.
I mean, their whole feed is like a whitewash. All the partnerships and ambassadors that they have are white. Besides Asha, who is the CEO's girlfriend, who is part Indian, so she is a person of color. She owns Pirate the Pitbull. So like the two, I guess, faces of Grounds and Hounds are Molly the Dalmatian and then Pirate the Pitbull.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of dogs.
And that's the thing, and that's the excuse that a lot of people have been using, is that it is all about the dogs. And we'll go into that in more detail because there is a really great Instagram live that I want to talk about that Ellen and Pac did, and they discussed this issue. Yeah, so I'm not saying, obviously, I still like Grounds and Hounds, and I think what a lot of what we've seen, especially in social media, is like just cancel culture, where people are calling out brands and then turning their back on them. And I feel like instead of cancel culture, it should be accountability culture. And so instead, I think it should be that we are asking questions and making suggestions. I just think that's more productive in terms of growth. And it's also just this trend of now this brand person, whoever, is alienated from the cause and now can't speak up and can't be a part of it because they fucked up.
Oh, completely agree.
There's a really great interview that Jamila Jamil did with Trevor Noah that's circulating right now, where she's talking about cancel culture, and she says, like, I used to be problematic and I appreciate people that called me out, didn't patronize me, you know, and I made the changes that I need to make. And then she was saying, you know, thank fuck I wasn't cancelled, because now she's doing all of this activist work. I haven't yet, but I think we should definitely message Grounds and Hounds. Not that we have any existing relationship with them, we've never partnered with them, but just saying like, hey, I'd love to see more BIPOC on your feed. I'd love to see you partner with more influencers and have more ambassadors that are inclusive. And even maybe giving them suggestions of some dog accounts that have great photography that they could partner with.
Yeah.
And I think also for anyone that listens or anyone that has partnered with Grounds and Hounds, like Pigpen the Pity, I know has worked with Grounds and Hounds. Ellen and Pac has worked with Grounds and Hounds. I just think it's a great thing to do, to just be like, hey, I've looked at your feed. I don't see any Black, Indigenous, people of colour. I think it'd be great if you could add this. I feel like it's mostly in the UK. A lot of influencers have been posting, I hate the word influencer, posting about having an inclusivity clause in their contracts.
Yeah, I've seen this.
So like if they're going to work with a brand, they have a clause in the contract saying that they also want inclusivity in. And I do think, I guess for smaller dog companies that are working with ambassadors, they may not have contracts, but I think it is just like, if you're working with a brand, just say, hey, I'd love to know, are you also including Black, Indigenous, people of colour? Or are they all white dog mums?
I agree with everything you've just said. And it's so important as well. I think it's just especially the accountability thing, because I think that's what I was doing at the beginning of this, because I know I've spoken to you about it, but kind of like cancelling people or like talking about people behind their backs, being like, oh, she hasn't done this, she hasn't done that, instead of being like, how can we encourage people who aren't doing it to do something or say something?
I know, and I think at the beginning of this, I was very critical of other people.
I mean, so was I.
Especially with that bloody black square thing. You know, there were so many different opinions on the black square from both white people and Black people. And I think, you know, people were trying to get involved and were trying to speak out. And that's just not the biggest issue to critique people on.
Like, and I don't actually like the term call out, but when you do kind of like engage with someone in a conversation surrounding this, it's hard in a way to, I think people get quite defensive about what they're doing, which causes just so many more, like such a spider web of issues. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because people do get defensive if they think they're being called out. So I think there needs to be a way of speaking to people in a way, because sometimes I'm on Instagram and I see so many comments that are so nasty and like very intense and very I'm unfollowing you because you haven't done this and you haven't done that. And I think there should be a way of speaking to people where it's like much more kind of like from an educational perspective rather than just like pointing the finger.
I mean, you're so right. People are being like nasty and critical, and it is like calling out and cancel culture. I think the best way to go about it is asking questions. Like, you know, I mean, it's a post that's been circulated on Instagram, just like ways to respond to racist or microaggressions that you hear people say, is just saying like, oh, what did you mean by that? Because then that makes the person think like, oh, wait, that might have been slightly racist. And then they can like think about that for themselves and like have this own like internal discussion and like realize that maybe that's something that they shouldn't have said, when really you haven't called them out and made them feel shit about themselves. You've just questioned it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also saw this really great video of David Bowie. And you know I love David Bowie. But he was in an interview with MTV, and this is from 30 years ago.
I literally watched this morning, but you didn't send it to me.
Oh, I posted it on my story.
Oh, that's where I saw it.
Well, anyway, he's in this interview with MTV, and then he kind of turns the question back onto the interviewer, and he's like, oh, well, why is it that black artists aren't being shown on MTV when, you know, they're equally, if not more talented than myself? And the answers, honestly, are pretty racist. And the interviewer was kind of like, oh, well, you know, we don't want to turn off any Midwestern viewers. You know, we don't want them to think this way about MTV.
Such disgrace.
Yeah. And I think just raising the question and reflecting on what your response is so insightful. And I think that's something that brands should be thinking about now, is like, why aren't you speaking out? Why aren't you being inclusive? Is it because you don't want to offend your audience or your clients, or you're worried about what they will think?
Yeah. Can we tangent on? You might have already got this in your notes, but then like leading on from that, I agree. Brands need to start doing that, especially like as a brand and you're selling a product and it's like a business. I think then the next level is also like dog accounts that have huge amounts of followers who, you know, can be considered influencers, you know, if they're pushing products and they're partnering with brands and stuff. Also, I think have a responsibility to stand up, at least at the minimum say something.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the video that we were talking about, the Akila. I don't actually know her last name, but I think her handle is Akila, obviously. So she made this video about influencers, and she was like, listen, if you are just promoting brands or like showing pictures of your brunch or you at the beach, you are just a salesperson. And I think that goes for dog accounts as well. If all you're showing is like the bandanas or the collars that you like or you're working with, then you're just a sales dog.
Yeah.
And there are humans behind the account.
And beneath, at the foundation of that account, okay, yes, you wanted to set up a dog, you know, an account to like for your dog, but at the basis, it's also making money.
Yeah.
And I think if you're doing that, I think you have a responsibility. I think there's quite a lot of controversy surrounding this, like influencers and like, are they responsible to say something or not? And I think there are a few people out there who would disagree with me, but I feel quite strongly that, I mean, listen, if you've got 10 followers or 100,000, just say something, because you could influence even one person.
Yeah.
So it really winds me up when people don't say anything. I mean, I've got 300 followers on my personal, and I always post stuff or repost or just put links in my bio, because if I can get one person to donate, then like that's great.
No, I completely agree.
And there are just so many dog accounts or influencers who don't post for fear of being unfollowed, or it doesn't fit with their aesthetic, or it's not what they're about. It's just the biggest amount of bullshit like in the entire world. I was chatting to my sister about this, and she was like, I'm so fingers crossing that like, not in terms of dog accounts, but influencers in general, this kind of like brings them down a peg or two.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I think the influencer world has become just so vapid, and it is just like about a lifestyle that you should want to obtain. And it just seems like there's no personality, there's no values, there's no opinions there. It's just like a robot. And it's just all very samey. Personally, I think you feel the same way. I prefer accounts where it is like a lifestyle, but it's something where it's like a girl and her dog, or like a girl on a ranch with some horses and some goats. And like, that's the kind of content I want to see. And it's not necessarily like salesy, I guess, or like, look at this car, look at this handbag.
But would you call that influencing? Like, for example, if you're a dog account and you've got 500,000 followers, and okay, you do the occasional product once every few months, but apart from that, it's like just you living your life. Like Spotted Acres, for example. Do you consider that influencing?
I would say yes, because I think influencing is more than being a salesperson, or it should be. It's like her way of life. Like, what does she do with her dogs? How does she train her dogs? How is she introducing the dogs to the goats? How is she, you know, what medications or what health insurance, pet insurance does she have with her animals? Does she go hiking with her dogs? What hikes does she go on? Where does she go on holiday with her dogs?
And so you think those people then need to say something in times of crisis?
Yeah, I think if you have any platform, you should say something. I think it has to be, like, you can't ignore it. It's like, I think a new wave of, like, influencers would be taking on just taking on some form of activism in their lifestyle and in what they're posting about. And it can be something, you know, that you're passionate about, like it would be the environment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I also think there's just something genuine about, because at the end of the day, well, this is what I hope, that everyone has, like I said this to you before, fuck, this is going to be such a long podcast, Gina, because I feel like we're just talking so much, and I also feel like we've said this to each other before, but like there's something so genuine about caring about something, and it's part of your personality, you know, like, oh my god, my dog is snoring, about like what you're passionate about and stuff. So I completely agree. I think bringing that to like the forefront of your platforms would be such a great way to move forward as like a community online, because I think then that would like really help like instill some sort of change.
I think that would be like a nice evolution of influencer.
But I'm sure there are so many influencers out there who do have these passions who just aren't speaking about it. And it's like, well then, I know there was such a debate about like, oh, you shouldn't call people out because they might be doing stuff offline. Yeah. And I totally agree, and I totally get that. And like, I have a dear friend who never posts on Instagram, and she does it all offline. She does an amazing job with loads of things. But I think if you've got a lot of followers, or you know, and you're a general poster, and you're like, hey guys, I haven't said anything, it's because I'm doing it all offline. I'm like, well, that's great, but at the same time, you could be doing even more by talking about it online. You know?
Yeah. I think also it's a worry of like people being called, this is the other thing about calling people out, is like people being called out for things being performative, but actually like sometimes I think it's useful. Like if someone posted about them going to a protest or about them doing something, it's then like, oh shit, they're going to protest every day, like why aren't I? Yeah. If you can go to a protest. I'm not saying everyone should go to a protest, or like, especially because we're in a fucking pandemic because of a virus. And I think at the beginning of the protests, a lot of people that I kind of know in New York City were hesitant to go to a protest because obviously you're in a large crowd. And I think by seeing like other people and my posts about going to a protest, it was like, oh, okay, so people are going and it's fine.
And I think like even with the performative thing, like if someone posts, okay, yes, on the one hand, it is a little bit performative and not genuine, and you're like, oh, you're just jumping on the bandwagon because you think that's the right thing to do. But on the other hand, I don't want to shut people down for that, because you still posted a link, and a link is helpful. Yes, there might not be an incredible amount of thought, and yes, you could have done more, but like, I'm not going to be like, unfollow. Do you know what I mean? I think we just need to be careful about the performative thing.
Yeah, and it's also like everybody has to start somewhere, and if that is where they start with just posting a link and then they think about it a little bit more, then that's great. So just going back to like dog accounts and how you were saying that people, if they have a platform, like should be saying something. So a dog account that we have spoken about in the past used to be, what was the old Instagram handle? Nelly
and Ellen.
Oh, was it? Nelly and Ellen. Okay, well, the Instagram handle is now Ellen and Pack, and she has a second dog, Louise. So she has done 2 Instagram lives so far with, I actually don't know who the first one was with, I haven't seen it, but the second one was with a dog influencer that is a Black Indigenous person of colour. And so I watched this Instagram live and I was like, I have to discuss this with Kitty. So they were discussing brands in the dog world and how...
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I'll send it to you. But the discussion was like how dog brands have been like, oh, well, you know, like you only see the dog, like it's just about the dog, and we're breed diverse. And Ellen made this really great point that more and more accounts and brands have made the shift to like a dog owner lifestyle post. So it will be like dogs and their owner, like dogs and their owner going hiking, or like you and your dog snuggled up in a blanket, or whatever it is. It's more of a lifestyle, and I feel like that is so true. And I know we've always been on the side of like, show me the dog, don't show me your face. But I think like there has been a shift. And even Ellen said, which I found this so funny because I know we've said this before, she was like, yeah, I know people think I'm narcissistic for it, but I love myself and I love my dogs and I want to take pictures with my dogs and post them.
Her posting a photo with her dog wasn't me being like, she's narcissistic. Her doing like 10 stories of her face about people in her comments, that's not related to the dog in any way.
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting that she brought it up, and I know that's something we have said about her before, but I think she's right. There is a general shift of like showing more of the owner and the dog. Like, I love Sam and Eric from Pigpen the Pity. Ellen is like very passionate, and she has been very outspoken, which...
Oh, I really respect her for that. And what I liked about her is not just on this topic. She's always said something, whether it be like, I don't know, like bullying or whatever. I feel like she's always given her opinion, which makes me respect her even more now, because I know it's coming from a genuine place rather than like doing it because she feels like she has to.
So the person she was doing this live with, her name's Lucy, and the dog account is Northern Jindo. So she has a Jindo called Aspen, really cute. But she brought up this great point that if you are a brand looking for ambassadors, you can see who the human is behind the account. Like, you just have to do a little bit more research. Like, you can see the hand that's holding the leash, or like the hand that's holding the toy, or like look in the stories. And like, I feel like especially in stories, maybe not on people's feeds, but like you'll see the people and the dog going for a hike, or like snuggled up in bed. I'm using those two examples because I can't think of anything else. But like, you can tell, and it's just the dog world tends to represent just like a white dog mum and their dogs.
And can I just say, sorry, I just want to jump in before we keep going, but like, especially with, you know, seeing what the owner, like what ethnicity or whatever the owner is or whatever, it just reminds me, like, in general, brands should be doing so much more research than like going on their page and looking through, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I wish there was more thought put in, and vice versa with the influencer and the brand. Like, think more carefully about the brand you are choosing to represent, you know? And it goes the other way in terms of, like, you know, if you can, choose to work with a Black-owned brand or all this kind of thing. I just think there needs to be put more thought into things like this.
Yeah, instead of seeing like, oh, this brand has this many followers, this will be a good collaboration. Or for the brand, oh, this influencer has this many followers, this is a good collaboration. Like, just putting more thought in. Yeah, so obviously, like, that's one point of what dog brands can do, but another great point that Lucy made, and I think this is something that we've seen, and personally we love this style, is a lot of dog brands with their bandanas or their collars or their leashes have this, like, I guess, indigenous print. Do you know what I mean? You've obviously seen it, like something that looks indigenous in the print.
Yeah, kind of. I can kind of. I'm thinking of Nelly and Ellen's quite like
the collars with like the colours and the patterns.
Yeah.
And so Lucy had this great suggestion that if a brand wants to use those kind of styles, why not collaborate with a Black Indigenous person of color company that does fabrics and like make it a whole collaboration. Then you're elevating this brand and you're able to use these fabrics.
Or like artists.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, I agree. It's just so sad to me because like when we talk about this now, it seems so like obvious. And you're like, why wouldn't you do that? And it's so sad. I think we always knew. I just don't think it was ever something that we thought should be changed, if that makes sense. Because I feel like in the back of my minds you would know, or you would go on someone's feed and be like, whoa, so many white people, but it never really crossed our minds that like, hold on a second, like let's make the change now, you know?
You're so right. And I think, like I've been on probably like before this, a brand's page and been like, oh, these are all like white girls with their dogs, but it's never been the thought, or like even that we could, I guess, say something to hold brands accountable and be like, hey, I don't see any BIPOC on your page. And I feel like we should have been doing that. So that, I guess that kind of conversation came from that Instagram live, which you can see on Ellen and Pac's IGTV page if you want to go and look at that to see the whole conversation. But something else I thought that we should talk about is that dogs have a history in racism, and I don't think, again, that we were fully aware of it.
I'm interested about this.
Yeah, and I feel like it's something that we do need to discuss and everyone should be aware of if you're a dog owner and in the dog world. So recently with all the protests, obviously fucking Trump had something to say. So he warned that, quote, vicious dogs would attack protesters. And it's so problematic because that's a direct reference to dogs being used against Black people from the times of enslavement through civil rights movements to today. And so there is a great, he's a assistant professor of African American and African diaspora studies at the University of Nevada. His name's Tyler Parry. So he specializes in the history of like racism and dogs, which I think is interesting.
It's a very niche sort of section, isn't it?
Okay, maybe I shouldn't say specializes in, but like has done research in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so he's not only about that.
No.
Okay.
No, African American and African diaspora studies, not just like dogs and racism studies. So he made this comment, and he, after, in a reaction to what Trump had said, he was like, I honestly don't know if Trump truly knew the history of what he was saying or if it's just someone in his ear. But he also said, quote, but you don't have to be an expert to know that threatening protesters with vicious dogs evokes a very uncomfortable and heinous chapter of American history, unquote. So he's basically saying that, like, you know, either it's Trump's an idiot, but like also there's no way that he can't know this. And I was thinking about this and I was like, fuck, you know how the other day we were talking about how old Trump is?
Yeah.
And I was like, fucking hell, like we forget how old he is and that he lived through the civil rights movement. And so he fucking knows. Like, he knows what he's saying.
But does he? I mean, I feel like he's such a fucking idiot.
So the specific images that are going around because of what he said are from the Birmingham, Alabama campaign with the civil rights movement. And there were a bunch of teenagers that peaceful protested in 1963. And then they were attacked by dogs, specifically German Shepherds, police dogs.
Oh my God.
It's a really famous picture of this
I need to Google it.
black teenager being attacked by this German Shepherd, and the police officer is holding this child to stop them from running away so that the dog can like attack them. But the thing that I realized is that, I mean, Trump was the same fucking age as these teenagers that were being attacked by dogs at this time in history.
Oh God, that's like an amazing photo. Oh my God.
Yeah. Going back to the Tyler Parry. So he was explaining that dogs were employed as instruments of terror against black people long before the civil rights movement and are still used disproportionately today against African Americans living in the United States. So during slavery, there were dogs called the Cuban Mastiff and a Cuban Bloodhound, which were known for their powerful jaws, and they were favored by slaveholders for catching escaped enslaved people.
Oh my God. I've never heard of that breed. Are they still around?
So they're actually extinct now.
Oh, really? Can I look it up?
I'm imagining just a Mastiff.
Yeah, me too.
And I wonder what a Cuban Bloodhound looked like. I mean, I guess it's just going to be paintings, right?
Yeah, they are paintings.
There's no
and, like,
photographs.
Sketches. Yeah.
So then Tyler Parry also explained long debunked racist theories that owners believed that African American bodies emitted a scent that was distinct from that of whites, and they trained their dogs to hunt by having them chase and tree black men. And then just to continue the history of dogs in racism. So dogs were often brought to lynchings to intimidate and brutalize black victims. And before the police even had the canine units in the 1950s, police used to hold public exhibitions in which dogs would race to track down black men, and the fastest to do so were declared ready for sale. And then just a little bit more about the history of dogs in racism. During the time of the civil rights movement, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, obviously the protesters were being attacked by vicious dogs and they were deciding what to do about this. And Malcolm X suggested, you know, if a dog is biting a black man, we need to fight back and we should take knives to these protests to attack the dogs back. So Tyler Parry, this is a quote, "The reality for black people in the United States is that white people have often sympathized with animals more than they have with black people." And so Martin Luther King said, you know, if there are going to be videos and photos of black people stabbing police dogs, that will create less sympathy for the protests. And I think that's so true. And like even now, there's a video, I don't know if you've seen it. Oh, go ahead.
It is true, but how sad is that?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, obviously I don't want them to kill dogs, but like it's so sad that like he's right. If people saw pictures like that, they'd go mental.
I mean, it's like the Amy Cooper thing where people cared more about the dog. There's a video circulating of police. Have you seen it? Police capturing a mountain lion.
I feel like I've seen lots of videos like that, but probably not the one you're talking about.
Oh, so there's this video that's circulating and people are saying, because the police are capturing this mountain lion that's like wandered into this neighborhood, and they use a net and they're so careful not to hurt it, and people are like, oh, where's that concern when it comes to black people? And I was thinking about this and I was like, it's a mountain lion and mountain lions are protected. So if you kill a mountain lion in California, it's considered a misdemeanor punishable by imprisonment in a county jail or $10,000 fine, which honestly, from what we've seen, is more of a consequence than shooting a black woman in her bed while she's sleeping. Like, police fucking know there's probably going to be more of an accountability for them if they fucking shoot a mountain lion on video than if they kill a black person.
Well, it's like that dentist. With police brutality, a lot of what we've been saying is like, yeah, we're seeing a lot of it because we're capturing it on social media, but you know, think about how many times it happens where we're not capturing it on social media. And then you think about that dentist who killed that lion and it got worldwide media coverage. And how is that more? I mean, that was terrible and so sad, and he was a fucking prick, and you know. But, you know, you're so right.
I mean, it fucking sucks. Like, I know everyone's talking about Elijah McCain right now, which happened last year. And, like, no one heard about it last year. Also, I think it's really interesting, and I think this is something that I'm working on, but this is everything that we've talked about with like Malcolm X and like the Birmingham, Alabama campaign. This is all American history, and I think obviously similar things happened in the UK. Like, we're both British, but I live in New York now, so a lot of my world is American because I live here. But I think I've been really ignorant in thinking that the UK, like, I've always thought like, oh, we're not as bad as America because we abolished slavery first and we made America abolish slavery. And I think it's been something to research as like, we weren't taught anything in history class about the slave trade, about...
Well, I don't know about you, we were a tiny bit, but literally probably like 2 weeks of it, do you know what I mean? As opposed to like... But I was going to say, I think in the UK as well, it seems not as bad because we don't have guns. So less people will like, you know, aren't really shot by police.
Yeah. But just in terms of like the history, I feel like I didn't learn anything. I learned about
education.
Yeah, I learned about fucking 1066. If we ever learned about black history, like obviously the whole of the UK knows about MLK. We know about Rosa Parks, but that's American history, and I think it's so sad that we know nothing about black history in the UK. Like,
yeah, you're
why?
so right. Because I watched that film Roots, which is about slavery, but you're right, it's all American.
We only learn about slavery in terms of America's role. I think that's crazy. And I remember when I first moved to America for college, like I elected to take a black history class because I was like, right, I'm in America, like racism is a huge problem in America, so I've got to learn about black history in America. And it's just like, Gina, you fucking idiot, like you don't even know about black history in your own fucking country.
Well, neither do I, but I don't think that's our fault. I think that's just a severe problem in our education.
Yeah, but I also think, like, I obviously knew when I moved to America, I don't know anything about black history in America, I need to learn it. But where was that thought about the UK? Like, why didn't I actively think I need to go and research black history in the UK? Like, it's so easy when everything's on Google. I just like didn't think to do it, and that's something that I'm working on now.
But you know, you're so right.
So anyway, all I wanted to say was I feel like it's really important to understand the history and how it's played out and how black people have been left out of the dog world because historically dogs were weaponized against them. And I think because now we have these stereotypes that black people are scared of dogs, and then that in turn is like racism within the dog world. And I think like obviously not all black people are scared of dogs, just like not all white people love dogs, but brands and companies have left black people out of this world visually. And even like outdoorsy companies, this is something that Ellen was saying as well, like because she works for a camping retailer, like because it's a stereotypically white hobby that you go hiking, they've therefore like left out black people from anything visually in their marketing.
So bad. And again, one of those things you don't really think about.
So I just think it's really important to understand that history and like where that stereotype comes from. Yeah, so that's kind of like the stereotype of like black people don't like dogs. But then there's also this stereotype that dogs don't like black people, which again comes from historically dogs being used against black people. And there's this question, which I don't think we would have ever asked or like anyone we know would have asked. But then again, you don't really fucking know. But I watched this YouTube video. So the woman is called the Dog Liaison, and she had 3 dog trainers that were BIPOC, and they were talking about people asking, can dogs be racist?
It's such a stupid... That's like saying, can a child be... Do you know what I mean? It's just...
It is a stupid question, but I love the way that they broke this down in this discussion. So they started by saying, like, obviously dogs can't be fucking racist because they don't understand racial divides. People apply racism to their dog, and dog behavior and human perception is different, and race is a human construct, and people are projecting that onto their dog and then inferring the analysis of the dog behavior.
But can I ask a question? I don't want to seem ignorant, but yeah, I get that you could impose that onto your dog, but do dogs have the ability, like, for example, can a dog distinguish between a man and a woman?
So that's the thing that they were talking about, is that there are so many different, like, humans are just so complex. There are so many different things that the dog could be reacting to. And that there just isn't that much research in this area. So it could be things like tone of voice. It could be things like the person's height. It could be like someone's size, if they're wearing a hat, that kind of thing. So they were referencing this one study where they were looking into how human caregivers perceive racial bias in their pets. And they measured human implicit bias and dog bias to see if there was a correlation. And so it's a self-reported correlational study, so obviously it's not completely scientific. So they had dog owner and they had a stranger, and they reported the behaviors of the dog with the stranger. So whether they let them pet them, whether they were lunging, growling, sniffing, wagging their tail, whatever it is. And they also tested human implicit and explicit bias to see if the dog's perceived bias against a black person correlated with the human bias against the black person, and vice versa for white people. The results were that white caretakers perceived racial bias in their dogs when white participants also endorsed the stereotype that dogs prefer white people to black people in general. So even though it's self-reported, they are reporting that their dog prefers white people. And so when people are asking, is my dog racist? It says more about them than their dog.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, like you were saying, one of the things that they said is like questions we should be asking if there's going to be research in this area to kind of debunk that stereotype is questions like, can my dog differentiate between different ethnicities?
I would love to know the answer to that, and whether they have like the brain capacity to think that way, because my gut reaction would say no. I would say they would just think human. It's like us looking at a German Shepherd and Chihuahua. Like they're just different. They're dogs.
They're dogs, yeah.
They're dogs. But then obviously I can see the size difference. It's a really hard one. I don't know. And like, especially with like men and women, I know this is like off topic, but you know, like I feel like my dog can sense who's a woman and who's a man. Maybe she can't. I don't know, but I always think she likes men a lot. But maybe it's just a vibe.
See, that's the thing that they also talked about in the study, is that so it may be owners unintentionally teaching their white preference to their dogs from their behaviors around black people. So for example, like stiffening up, tightening on the leash, and like the owner is the most important signaler for how the dog should react.
And I can tell you, and that's why I have taught my dog to be bad with other dogs on the lead, because when I see another dog coming towards her and I know how she'll react, I get nervous, I pull her away, I start walking quicker. So I can see the way that even if a kid is riding a bike near me, I hold her tighter because I know she hates kids on bikes. But it's like a vicious cycle. The more I do that, the more she's associating my tiny tweak, you know?
I mean, it's also how, like, in humans, how phobias are created, where, like, if you're scared of dogs, you avoid the dog, and then by avoiding the dog, it's a positive. And yeah, I do the same thing with Harley. Like, I say that Harley doesn't like strange men, but it's fucking me. It's me being tense and anxious because there's a strange man approaching us.
So here's a question then. I once watched a kind of a 10-minute documentary about dogs who they were in a room with their owner and a toy, like a robot dog they'd never seen before. And when they were with the owner, they were a lot more confident in terms of like approaching the robot dog and sniffing it and seeing what was up and whatever. But when the owner wasn't in the room, they were terrified, they didn't go near it, they didn't want to be involved, whatever. So I'm thinking, if Harley is nervous around men when you're with her, is she, when she she's on her own.
So that's the thing. I think if Justin took her out, like when Justin walks her, she doesn't have a problem with any strange men. So it's me.
She doesn't?
No, like Justin hasn't experienced Harley growling at a strange man that wants to pet her. So it's 100% me.
It's so interesting.
I know, and I think it's all about dog behavior. It's not about if your dog is racist. Like,
oh no, 100% of it. Yeah, and but it's the same. It's the same logic applied to children. No child is born a racist. No child is born, thinking a certain way about someone. It's all subconsciously ingrained to them through the people they are surrounding themselves with, whether that be other children, teachers, parents. And that's why we have a problem as a society, is because we're subconsciously learning and picking up on things said and done by the people around us. And, not everyone is educated the same as some other people.
I just thought that study was particularly interesting.
It's so interesting. I want to learn more about that.
So that was a video, and it was the dog liaison talking to 3 different dog behaviorists and trainers. So I will link that in the show notes of the podcast, and I'll link anything else that we've referenced. So with those stereotypes that black people don't like dogs and that dogs don't like black people, it is important to understand the history behind it and where those stereotypes came from and how those stereotypes persist in the dog industry today. And I think we need to work on debunking those stereotypes and just striving for inclusivity within the dog world. And the brief history that we've gone over in this episode is very brief, so I would encourage anyone that's listening, if you're interested in this topic, definitely do more research.
And I was going to say, I think it's really important to recognise, and it's not just like, I think a lot of people are like, okay, yeah, we'll do better, we'll do better, we'll read and we'll research and we'll do better. And I think we just let's actually understand what we've been doing wrong, rather than pretend we haven't done anything wrong and be like, okay, let's do better. You've raised so many interesting points.
I mean, these are all things that I've researched. Like, I didn't fucking know about the history of dogs and racism.
Even if no one listens to this podcast, you've shown me, you've ignited in me, I'm going to go research that because I didn't know.
It also just emphasises the importance of including BIPOC in the dog world.
Completely.
And I think obviously That's So Fetch is a dog account, but even when we're obviously we repost other people's pictures, even when I'm reposting an account, I need to be more aware of who we're reposting and what accounts they are.
I agree.
And I think obviously moving forward with the podcast, I think it would be useful to have other interesting conversations about the history of dogs that aren't centered around white people.
And that's why I'm kind of thinking, like, it's sad I'm leaving, but also it's an opportunity to invite so many more different perspectives to this conversation. And there's a whole world out there.
Yeah.
That we're not getting involved with because they're not included in the conversation in general, so it's harder to access it. But if we start now,
it's working a little bit harder to diversify your feed. So for anyone listening, I think things that we're going to work on is diversifying our feed, so finding more Black-owned pet businesses, more Black-owned dog accounts, and then also just holding brands accountable for including BIPOC. Okay, well, this is your goodbye episode. Do you have any parting words?
Oh God, no, it's been so fun. I've loved it. I'm so struggling with having a business and doing this at the same time was just so fucking much. I'm just so excited, what's to come for the podcast. I'm so proud of you. You've done so well and you've created something, I think, so much bigger than I thought it could be. And I think, it's sad I'm not going to do it with you every week, but, I think there's so much room for, a new chapter of it.
Yeah. I mean, it was really hard when you told me you didn't want to be a co-host anymore. But I'm going to be fine.
And we've talked about it, and our friendship is more.
It's more than the dog podcast, yeah.
It's more than the dog podcast, and we've had such a good year of doing it, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, so if anyone's listening and is interested in being a guest, let me know.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for doing one last episode with me.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'll guest back on for Dalmatians.
Okay, great. And I know this episode wasn't exactly funny or upbeat like we usually are, but I think it was a really important episode to do.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys.
Make sure you follow us on Instagram. It's at That's So Fetch Podcast. And make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. Hopefully we'll have some new episodes soon with some exciting guests. And if you did really like this episode, please let us know in the reviews.
Love ya. Bye.
Bye.